Welcome to this episode of the CBI webinar series. My name is Chris Kepler. I'm the IT content director for CBI. Very few student-run media organizations have enough money. They really never have, probably. And unfortunately, that's only gotten worse for many over the last year with budget cuts at universities all over the country, probably the same at high schools as well. And it got us to thinking that a lot of stations might be thinking about ways that they can try to create new revenue streams through fundraising, or maybe just enhance what they're already trying to do. And in a moment, I want to turn it over to an expert who can offer us some tips about how to do that, and particularly how to do it during a pandemic. But first, some anticipated housekeeping rules. Again, my name is Chris Kepler. You can reach me directly if you need to or want to at itcontent@askcbi.org. We are recording this session, and it will be archived and placed on our YouTube channel. We are planning to continue the CBI webinar series next month. We're also planning an online workshop specifically related to sports broadcasting. That'll be this summer. We're really stoked about this one. And of course, the National Student Electronic Media Convention in Orlando this October. Information is or will be available about all those things at askcbi.org. I'd like to introduce Joyce MacDonald. She is the president and CEO of Greater Public. It's an organization that is dedicated to helping people like us become more financially sustainable. Joyce tells me she likes to keep things pretty casual, so we're not going to use a PowerPoint. Feel free to let her know if you have questions throughout. We can use the hand raise tool. Since there are a lot of people on the call, we can probably just talk. But however Joyce wants to direct that is fine. And I'll keep my eye on the chat as well. Joyce, let me turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much. It's a total pleasure to be here. I was honored to be asked. As Chris said, I would love for this to be as much a conversation, or more of a conversation, certainly, than a presentation. So welcome to those of you who are here in person, and hello to those who may see the recording later. As Chris mentioned, we have a nice sort of smallish half dozen or so group here. So I'd really love to approach this as a conversation. Before we start, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. And forgive me, indulge me, old mother radio. I was on the air at my college radio station, Stonehill College in Massachusetts, which was a campus radio station, truly. And I had a blast. I had 2 air shifts a week, and it was my favorite activity when I was at school. Majored in marketing, minored in communications. I then spent several years wandering in the corporate America wasteland. Got some great sales training, working for American Express, and just wasn't thrilled with life and my job. And I thought, this is the advice. What's your favorite part of the day? What's your favorite thing about what you do? And I realized my favorite part of my job was being in the car and going to visit clients around New England and listening to the radio. So I said, I know how to do something now. I know how to sell. So I ended up getting a position selling advertising for an alternative rock station in Boston, WFNX. Loved it, and then went back to graduate school at Boston University and got a master's in broadcast administration. Only a few schools in the country at that time were offering that program, but I was lucky enough to live in Boston and took advantage of that. And then when I left graduate school, I went to work for ABC Radio Networks in New York. Was there for 5 years, and then was hired away by Sony Music, who started up a radio network. And again, was there for about 5 years, and then realized most of my listening at that point in my life was to NPR. And thought, well, I've always said eventually I'd like to work for a nonprofit, and that qualifies, and I have transferable skills. So I ended up at NPR for 16 years in station relations, then as a vice president, and then chief of staff to the president, and then from there was hired away by Corporation for Public Broadcasting, And I was there and able to make grants supporting journalism across the public media landscape. And then the recruiters came and said, "We want you for Greater Public." So here I am, and that is me. I would love to know from you all, if you have access to your keyboard, what's your role at the station that you're at now? If you can put that in chat, or if you want to open your mic and tell me, that's equally good. Either way, I'd love to know, are you on the air? Are you an advisor, a manager, general manager, advisor? Great. Advisor for student media, general manager. Wow, this is a lofty group. Station advisor, faculty, general manager. Okay, wonderful. So, good. This is great. It stands to reason that the advisors and the general managers are the most interested in the funding. So I'm thrilled that you're all here. I totally admire what you do. Thinking back to my days in college radio, and I want to make this conversation as useful to you all as possible. So I often draw on my marketing background when I think about fundraising, and pose sort of the following questions. What can and what do we, whatever organization I'm with, uniquely offer? What can we and do we uniquely offer to our listeners, to our sponsors? It's pretty clear what you offer to your staff, right? But what do you offer to the community? And for some of you, the community may be your town or your city, depending on your signal, right, and your coverage area. And for others, it may be your campus. But I would say that in either case, you have a loyal audience and something that you uniquely are offering to them. So the question then becomes, do your loyal fans out there know how to support you? Is there a path for them, right? I know certainly NPR listeners are incredibly loyal listeners, and the next category of incredibly loyal listeners tends to be music stations, right? If you're playing a particular kind of music that really speaks to an audience, you will have high loyalty. But you also are speaking to your community, right? So those of you who have students on the air, you know, they have a network. They have a network of friends. Also in pandemic times, right? Lots of folks have been spending more time with media than ever before. And radio is in that media mix. Does your station offer information to folks on your campus about what's happening around the virus, what's happening around vaccination, what events might be happening online, et cetera, et cetera? Any and all of those things you uniquely provide to your audience. So I'd love it if you guys can open your mics. Let me tell you why. So I did a little due diligence here, and I looked at websites for a handful of stations who I know are part of your organization, and I saw some interesting variations. Right, so I don't want to make any assumptions going into this. I want this to really address your questions as we go through this hour together. So I saw some stations had a donate opportunity, right, for a visitor to the website. Most stations I saw, and granted, I only looked at a couple. Most stations weren't really featuring that on their website very prominently, and I'd love to hear from you whether or not that's because you have some restrictions on raising money from individuals, or whether there's a certain time of year when you do a drive, or if there's, where are you in terms of asking listeners to your station to support you financially? So, Scott, you go first.
We do 2 on-air pledge drives a year, one in the spring, one in the fall. Each is a week. I believe our donate or pledge now button is on the front page of our webpage. We also do then, after our on-air pledge drives, we go dark for about maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and then we run announcements, probably 15, 20 announcements a week asking people to pledge and support it.
Great.
So we have an ongoing campaign, and we're getting ready to launch one where we're getting local musicians and local members of the community to actually make the ask for us on those pre-recorded announcements.
Brilliant. Wonderful. John. Yep.
Let me unmute myself there. So we do a 7-day on-air fund drive in the spring. We also have a donate button. It's up all year round, and we push people during the year to do that. It doesn't usually net much. Our big drive is during the spring, and we've done it for 13 years now. We don't do one in the fall. There's just too much going on here, and we don't have the bandwidth for it.
Yeah. Okay. And do you run announcements, sort of, or?
Yeah, we probably spend 8 weeks leading up to it, letting people know about the event. We actually do a kickoff party the weekend before. We'll have live bands come. We usually do it at a local beer vendor down the street. Allows us to come in and use the space. And so we'll kind of throw a kickoff party. And then, like I said, we'll spend 6 to 8 weeks pushing it on air and through social media. We'll spend a few bucks and boost our posts on Facebook and some of the other social media platforms and things of that nature. So
great.
We give out some premiums as well. We try to mix that up every year for donation levels. This year we finally got our act together and we're able to offer pint glasses, which worked out really good. As
awesome.
You can imagine.
Yes, indeed. I remember those days. Great. Gregory.
Yeah, we don't do a pledge drive on the air or have a donate button, mostly because our university really frowns on people raising money outside of their institutional advancement area. Their restructurings might be something we can look at a little bit in the future when their new leadership takes over. One thing we do, but maybe not as much as we should, is we make sure our students know that their parents are constantly getting calls from the university and that they can donate, make their donation directly to the radio station. So every now and then I'll see donations come in with the same last name as one of my students.
Nice.
But, yeah, so that's the best we can do, as far as strictly pledge drive stuff right now.
Got it. Okay, I'll come back to you with some thoughts on that in a second. Jamie.
My situation is pretty similar to Greg's. All fundraising goes through our development office, and I was also worked for NPR affiliates for 9 years, so I have trauma that I worked through for pledge drives. But one thing that we have done at our university is we have a day of giving. And I think this was like the 3rd one, and the radio station supports it. They're like, hey, we have a day of giving. And we do have a student media enhancement fund that benefits all of our groups. We set up one specifically for the newspaper last year when it celebrated its 100th anniversary. And we almost have like $50,000 in that.
Wow.
And in terms of this past time, just about a month ago, a lot of the donations that came in, those are names that I recognize. Those are my alumni for the radio station. So I'm hoping that we can get a specific fund set up for the radio station, because I think it's hard to say donate to the enhancement fund. It'll go to student media, which is us.
Right. Yep. were part of that. So where did you work? What NPR stations did you work?
In undergrad, I worked at WEMU at Eastern Michigan
Sure.
University.
Yep.
And then I moved a couple hours north and worked at CMU Public Broadcasting in Central Michigan for 5 years.
Oh, awesome.
Here.
Awesome. 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 Great. Okay. Lynn.
I will mimic off of what Greg and Jamie Lynn both said, where our student media doesn't really do any active fundraising. That all comes through our development office. We do have some individual folks who we have, on the weekends, we have some older listeners. So we have one little old lady. If she sends me a PSA, she also sends me a $5 check with it.
Oh.
So, hey, every little bit. We don't actively fundraise, though. It all goes through our development office as well.
Yeah. Interesting. So, so observation number one, many NPR affiliate stations, and first I should say we have about 240 member stations that we work with at Greater Public, and the vast majority of them are NPR member stations, and the majority of them are news stations, but we do have some music station members as well. And it's so interesting, the university licensed NPR stations also have some restrictions put on them, but more typically in the major giving area, right? Where, stations by and large have been able to sort of set up a web donation process, for example, that does allow the funding to come to them through the university. So an example is WAMU here in Washington, D.C. is licensed to American University. When you donate to them, you do it all through their website and platforms, but then your acknowledgement comes from American University, which is very interesting. But I know when it comes to major giving, there often needs to be a lot of back and forth and a real sort of effort on the part of station management to be allowed to pursue major gifts independently of the university fundraising. And it's so interesting for you guys, as you've said, you see donations coming from alumni, which makes a lot of sense. However, for a station like WAMU that has hundreds and hundreds of thousands of listeners in the DC area, the number of alumni of American University in their listening audience is quite small. And so we're sort of able to show a current donor list for a station to that university department and run it against the alumni list and realize, only 3% of our listeners are actually alumni of the university. So we're missing a big opportunity to raise funding for this radio station. So again, I think it probably depends on your coverage area. For those of you who are doing pledge drives, Scott and John, where are your donations coming from? Is it sort of the community at large?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there. I've watched that number change drastically over the last 13 years. So, I think we all have a mission, and that's to cultivate that idea of giving back and being involved with the station even after you graduate. And so years of me kind of preaching that, I've watched the alumni numbers tick up. My numbers from this year, actually, I just ran them the other day. 18% of our total take this year was from alumni, and that's grown from like 2 or 3% to almost 20% this year. The rest comes from the community at large. I think there's a small percentage that comes from the students that actually listen to the station on campus, but the majority of that, I think, comes from the community.
Yep. I'm not surprised because your coverage area is...
It's big enough, to reach that. That That's pretty much our makeup. Again, I think last year my number was 15 and change. So another 3% this year, 3 or 4% grew in alumni donations. So,
Yep.
and I'm seeing those donations that were just $25 or $30 a few years ago turn into $100
Yeah,
and $500 donations. So those are nice.
Well, yep. I was going to ask.
You never know where they're going to
what the-
come from either. It's student
Yeah.
graduates, and you think, yeah, maybe they can donate something, and then 3 years later they ship you $500 and say they're doing great.
Yep. And good for them.
Yeah, great for them.
And what about you, Scott?
We're a little different. We get very few alumni donations. We cultivate our alums, but we really ask them to give back to our current students with their time and their talent and their networks.
Yep.
So we want them to mentor our current students. We want them to participate in class projects. We want them on campus or last year through Zoom interacting with our students and doing those type of things. Some do give back, but we really try to keep them connected with the program by having them pour themselves into our students as the alums before them poured themselves into them when they were on our campus. So I would say probably 98% of our donations come from our listeners.
Yep.
And we've got a big signal. We're a Class B FM in Indianapolis, so we cover the entire metro area plus some fringe counties. So, yeah, we ask the people to if you like what we're doing,
Yep.
your donations help us to not only continue it but to do more.
Yep.
And that works for us. But yeah, so we're a little different than it sounds like everyone else.
Yep. Yes. Your footprint, I think, puts you in a different category. So I'll just cite one statistic for you guys. When you look at the average NPR member station, the average Greater Public member, 40% of their financial support comes from individuals, and about 20% comes from businesses in their communities. How do you guys look at your revenue pie, and what are your aspirations?
When you are saying business support, are you talking underwriting, Joyce?
Yes.
For us, it's about 60-40. About 60% of our funding comes from underwriting, 40% from donations.
Yep. And I know some of you can't take donations, and that's cool, but I would just kind of like to know what the revenue pie looks like.
And I would say of the underwriting, probably 75% of that are other not-for-profits.
Okay.
And then about maybe 25% is for-profits. Again, we use the loophole in the FCC underwriting rules that if it's a not-for-profit, you can run full-blown commercials. So we effectively, the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra is a $20 million a year not-for-profit, but they got a big marketing budget, and we'll take their commercials and put them on the air.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, like everyone else, I wish the underwriting rules were less restrictive. We think we get more for-profits if we did that, but we will play by the rules until we find a way to change them.
Yeah. Yeah. What about the rest of you?
At WKNC, our funding is about 50% student fees, and then the other 50% is whatever I can cobble together. Part of it is underwriting. Part of it is we air Wolfpack women's basketball and men's baseball, and that's a sizable chunk every year. We sell T-shirts in a PCI compliant online store. We work with Live Nation and do promotion for some of their concerts. We do mobile DJ services. We rent out our studios, everything.
Wow.
At one point, we were 90% non-fee funded, but then I decided I didn't care, and I didn't need to be busting my butt in order to get that student fee number down. Plus, we paid our students a flat rate that was roughly $5 an hour, and I knew that eventually when we paid them a fair wage, there's no way we could have afforded it without more student fees. And I figure we deserve at least as many student fees as the yearbook. So
I would agree.
Yeah, I guess I would just back up. If we're talking about total funding, about 70% of our funding does come from the university itself.
Yeah.
We have to raise the other 30.
Got it. Got it. And I see here, Lynn, 90% comes from university, 10% underwriting. Use our underwriting as backup in case something major pops up. Insurance fund. Gregory says pretty much the same. Bottom has fallen out of the underwriting market for us. Well, I will just comment on that. In this COVID time, many of our member stations are struggling with underwriting because of the pandemic, and in particular in the events area, and in the retail area. Their underwriting sales fell anywhere from 50 to 75% over the past year, and it's starting slowly to come back. I think folks have had some success in calling on different types of clients, healthcare, remote learning, although being student stations, you probably can't advertise a opportunity to get a degree on a competitor. See, I catch on quick. And home improvement, I know, was a big category. Again, maybe not applicable to your audience. So yes, Jamie's saying two biggest underwriting clients are concert and venues. So it's 0 this year. Right. So the thing that I always come back to, again, my marketing hat, when I think about any organization that's looking to raise money, the first question is always, what is it for? And Scott, you sort of said it's to keep what we're doing on the air and allow us to do more. Have any of you sort of dreamed that you suddenly got $100,000 out of the blue? What would you use it for in your operation? What's sort of your next level? And maybe $100,000 isn't enough, or maybe it's too much. I don't know. Greg.
Yeah, well, for us, a couple of things. Studio upgrades, which we're actually in the process of doing because our university funding stayed flat this year, but they didn't let us pay for any travel or things like that. We didn't have student employees in our office. So that turned into a windfall that we're using for some upgrades. But for us, it would be a signal upgrade. We have a Class D signal, 10-watt directional in an urban area. There are no signals available in Pittsburgh. So I would love to buy somebody else's stick from them. If I had, it would take more than 100,000, but that's the dream.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, is your Greg? Does your signal cover beyond campus, or is it?
It covers beyond campus, but it's local. And that's one of the problems with underwriting is that's what we always pitch, because Pittsburgh being a top 30 market, if you're advertising on a commercial station or a full market signal, it's expensive. So we pitch the local businesses on the hyper local.
Right, exactly.
You don't need to pay for a 9-county area to people walk down the street. But now, since most of the students aren't on campus, nobody's walking into those businesses. So we don't really have an angle at the moment.
Yeah. Understood. It will come back. What about others? Lynn, what would you do?
I put in the chat here, but any bonus money, I guess,
Better
for our
equipment.
organization would be better equipment.
Yeah.
We have recently converged all of our student media together. So radio before we converged was kind of the one that got the money. So our newspaper and our video channel, they do not have great equipment. So as much as I'm a radio gal at heart, and I'd like to say new boards and new mics and everything for radio station, we could really use some new DSLRs and some new editing software and some more video equipment would actually, if someone just handed us money, that would be my kind of go-to.
There you go. That makes a lot of sense. What about you, John?
We started this years ago so that we could do a big signal increase. And so we used a big chunk of what we raised in that first 10 years to pay for a new transmitter and a new antenna. We're building it back up. I like to have a rainy day fund in case I have a catastrophic failure. I've tried to build things as redundant as possible here, but there's always gaps and places that need to be fixed. Just that, and to give us some more free room. A lot of our funding here is locked into certain things, and so having the soft money allows us to do the travel for CBI and things of that nature,
Right.
and professional development, and allows us to buy promotional items, which we were not allowed in our budget before. So it's given us that money to do that. I'm probably looking at a soft studio upgrade in a couple of years, so we'll probably burn a chunk of it up then, but that'd be it at this point. I think we're pretty set on the signal chain side. It's probably be back home here in the studio.
That's great. That's great. What about you, Jamie?
We actually just recently completed a complete upgrade of all of our studios using
Awesome.
Media Reserve funding. But what we're trying to get funding for right now is we need to paint our tower because it hasn't been painted in at least 15 years, and I'm sure eventually the FCC and FAA will notice. So we're actually working on a grant through the university, and we're going up to the roof of the library tomorrow to shoot some footage of our engineer standing in front of the tower and says, "Yeah, we got to paint that."
Yep.
But that's what we're the bulk of what we need right now.
So
I keep putting it in the budget every year, and it never stays there.
And it never stays. So it sounds like what most of you would love is, things to pay for hard costs, out of pocket costs. And I know granted the university relationship could be problematic, but whenever I hear equipment upgrades, technological upgrades, a campaign around that with the right donors, maybe they're alumni of the station, and it it may not take that many people to get a message to who might be interested in that. And I know, Scott, you would rather have folks donate their time and their expertise and their care, but for one-time expenses like that, yes, a grant is great, but also an appeal to alumni of the station might bring more than you think. If the station alumni or anything like me, the incredibly fond memories and understanding that this launched me into a career, you have a lot of hearts and minds out there. So I would just think about that. Maybe there's go ahead.
I was just going to say we're blessed with technology. We're looking at 2 capital projects if they're approved. One is to move a microwave site that actually will get us much better lease terms. So we'll actually, if we can get it funded, we'll save the university money over a 10-year period with our monthly lease costs. And then we've got relatively new consoles, but we were one of the first stations to go audio over IP, so the infrastructure needs replaced. If I had $100,000, I would launch a local news operation, heavily staffed by students that would be tied to curriculum. And I think the community would benefit from having another voice with all the consolidation that's happened and a lot of radio outside of the main news talk station in town and the NPR affiliate in town. Those are the 2 news operations.
Yeah.
I think we could probably, on the other side of it, give money back to the university with the students we would attract and the tuition and the fees that they would pay along the way. So if I had $100,000, we'd launch a local news operation and tie it all to curriculum to give students an outstanding experience, because we're seeing a lot more news jobs open up in commercial and public radio than I've seen in a long time.
Yeah. particularly public radio. And that, I'm sure you're all aware, but, all of the attention on the part of foundations and the media on the lack of local reporting across the country. Public media is the shining light in that conversation. I want to say 4,000 reporters added over the last 5 years. It really is, and public radio in particular, is where we are growing our local newsrooms while others are pulling back. And so any of your students who are interested in journalism, who are doing on-air reporting with you guys, I really, if they're interested in doing that for a career, public radio is the place. Lots of opportunity. But so what you were just saying, Scott, sounded to me, again, like a great campaign. See, you invite a fundraiser to talk about fundraising, and I'm like, let me raise money for that. It sounds like a pretty compelling case statement to me, and the experience that it would give your students would be incredible. And I also think about, and I'll turn the spotlight on you, Chris. Is there any kind of fund that the College Broadcasters Association has set up that could take contributions on behalf of its members for things like equipment?
No. And Greg probably, is he still on here? I don't
Yes.
see. Say he has more history. Jamie Lynn has more history than me too. To my knowledge, we don't have anything like that set up. I don't know if it's ever been discussed.
Yeah. I just think about the radio industry, the journalism industry, the music industry. Where is their talent of the future going to come from? And a lot of it's going to come from exactly where you guys are. And I think to myself, could I see making an appeal to the National Association of Broadcasters, or to RTNDA, or to others for some kind of a fund that that either could be given out as grants by the College Broadcasters Association, where folks could apply, or for very specific opportunities for the group. Just a thought. I'd be happy to help. And I think it's important to recognize that by definition, your operations sit within a university that has its own fundraising concerns. But what you are uniquely offering to the students that work with you and your communities, I think, presents what could be a compelling investment for some of these other organizations when they think about talent of the future. Just a thought. All right, I see we've got about 20 minutes left, and I would be more than happy to take any questions that you have. Yes.
Joyce, I have students approach me sometimes, actually kind of often, wanting to start a merch store. They want me to sell merch, or they want to sell merch on the website. I think some of it is branding,
Yep.
which is great.
Yep.
I think some of it is they think we're going to make.
No.
We have not done it.
No.
There's a lot of things. There's just a lot of moving parts to that, I think,
Yes.
before we would launch. And I'm wondering what your advice is,
Yeah.
when people are considering doing something like that, if
Yeah.
it's even worthwhile.
The only reason I would do it is for branding. The only reason. The margin on merch is usually pretty quickly eaten up, depending on what kind of a program you develop, either by a provider of the merch and then the people that mail the merch, and then the kind of time and effort it takes to, do all the things that need to be done in terms of charging credit cards or whatever. I mean, you're setting up a store. And I did see when I looked at the website, some of you have that, but it mostly looks like a branding opportunity, right? So if you want to get the word out across campus and across your community, a T-shirt, right? That's a walking billboard for you. The tried and true radio swag, as some call it, absolutely works. As a fundraiser, I wouldn't go there personally. I just think that it's a lot of work for a fairly slim margin. And I think that a lot of the people that would buy your merch because they love you would give that money to you anyway. And this is a conversation that makes me not all that popular all the time in public media. The stereotype of the tote bag and the coffee mug is there. It's a stereotype for a reason. And we continue as an industry I feel somewhat over rely on giveaways. Stations have experimented and said, okay, we're going to give people the option, right? Instead of, they gave us the $120, so they're going to get the, insulated coffee mug. We're going to accept the pledge and then ask them if they want the premium. And something like 70% of the people said, no, thank you, you can keep it. So, and the other thing about it is it becomes a transaction then, it's instead of kind of a pure support, it sounds transactional, and it is kind of transactional, and I think public media doesn't need it anymore. They're going to quote me in Current newspaper. So anyway, however, as a branding exercise in the right circles, a tote bag gets looked at. On your campus, probably not as much as a T-shirt or a beer cozy or baseball hat. So yeah, that's how I would draw the line. Other questions?
On that line, we have I think had some success with premiums that promote listening. I was in my office earlier today, one of the few days I'm on campus every week, and we were just sending out our spring pledge drive gifts, and we were wrapping up 30 HD radios to send out. We run 3 HD channels, and we can take an $100 HD radio and put it at the $250 pledge level. We get a pretty good margin there. Plus, we have the 3 HD channels that gets more listening to our HD2. We also have put our logo on some Echo Dots that we're getting for like $30 a piece, and then getting them out the door, so that when the listeners are looking at it, hopefully they're going to ask Alexa or whoever to listen to our radio station. Just thoughts on there are days when I feel like we've reduced the public radio pledge drive to the home shopping network, but there are also times where I think we're really doing ourselves a service by putting the dots in the home, so that now there are home radios. Now that there are HD radios in the home, they can listen to our signal and get better quality. But just your thoughts on trying to accomplish not only the fundraising goal, but also to build the audience and the loyalty.
Yeah, and I would put the Echo Dot and the HD radio on the side of marketing, right, and branding. I think I know some stations in the past have given away thumb drives with archived radio programs on them, or a custom made app of classical music chosen by the station. Things that keep people, that increase loyalty to you, and that translates into listening. I think are great. I know that in the prior years when HD radio was first getting started, a number of stations actually purchased HD radios and gave them to some of their major donors. To me, that's different from a tote bag. What you're talking about is much more in line with a marketing strategy. So that makes sense to me.
I had one more question on the pledge drives. We set a record for pledges and money received in 2019, but we thought because of the pandemic, our numbers were probably going to be down with donations. So we shortened our 7-day pledge drive to a 5-day pledge drive. And at the end of the year, we missed our 2019 mark by $6.
Oh, did you pay it out of your pocket? Did you take it out of your wallet right there?
No, I didn't. But what it told me was maybe we don't need to be on the air for 7 days. Maybe we just need to be on the air for 5 days or 4 days, and the people are going to give.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to disrupt the listening audience a little less than what we were doing previously. I don't know if you have any.
Yeah.
That the NPR station in town, they go on the air for 10 days and they stay on the air until they raise what they need. And all it does is build my listeners, because a lot of people defect from them to listen to me because they're tired of the pitches.
Yeah.
So is there a sweet spot there in terms of how much the audience will tolerate? So just thoughts on the length of the pitches.
Yeah, I think public media at large, public radio, is getting away from a more than 5 to 7 day pledge drive. And what we're advising, what seems to work better, is focusing your pitching during your highest audience times, if you know that, right? If you have the ratings and can see that. So what a lot of stations do now is they only go on the air and ask for pledge money during morning edition and All Things Considered, right? They may run, 30-second promos about giving in between those times, but they really try to hit where the most audience is, because your most loyal listeners are the ones that listen the longest, so they're going to hear more of the pledge drive than anyone else. And and your instinct is right. It's kind of like if they're going to give, they'll probably have given. What we advise stations to do is think about adding an additional pledge drive as opposed to extending the drive that they're doing. And there may, given that your campus staffed, there may be good reasons why you can't do that. But some stations have had success doing a 1-day drive, which they message about a lot ahead of time. They ask folks to go to their website and pledge ahead of time, and then they're really only on the air for one full day. WBRR in Boston did a 1-day drive that brought in $1 million during the pandemic. So a lot of stations sort of had some trepidation about going on the air and asking for money early in the pandemic. We encourage them beginning like April. It's like you are more valuable to your listeners than ever during this pandemic. You're literally sharing life or death information with them. So we advise folks to go on the air for a shorter period of time, several times over the course of the spring, summer, fall. And a lot of stations have had record membership for their fiscal year 2020, whether that's a calendar year or, July through June. Their audience has really stepped up. A number of new members, folks who'd never given before, giving. And, it stands to reason. You were talking a little bit about the current news environment. And I mentioned before the loyalty of NPR listeners. There was a survey done of NPR radio listeners, not necessarily members, but even, occasional listeners, asking during the pandemic, what is your number one source for accurate, trustworthy information about COVID-19. And the answers, it was local newspaper, local television, the CDC, state, medical, government, NPR, and number one, far and away the number one choice was my local NPR station. So, public radio, and I include you guys in that category. We are independent. We are of the community. We are local, and local. There's I think been a pendulum shift for a lot of people over the past years, and certainly having gone through 2020, local is more important than ever. I remember hearing, well, everything's on the web. It's, where communities of interest are more important than where you live now. People define their communities differently, and that may all be true, but I think the need for a local institution and a local community and a local voice that you trust is more than ever. And that's partly why I think stations saw the kind of fundraising success from individuals that they had last year. Of course, their underwriting tanked, so they didn't end up with a surplus, but they did better than they would have done otherwise. Other questions? Thoughts? Rants?
I would just add maybe an idea for those of you that can raise money on the air. And I'm starting to, having heard from you, I'm very fortunate that I can do this. I will say that whenever we do raise money, we make sure our development office, while they let us do it ourselves, they absolutely include it in their total that they can then report out to the administration. But in the state of Indiana, where I am, if you give money to a university, you get an extra state tax break.
Oh, right.
And I think it's that way in a lot of places. So as you mentioned, Joyce, with American University, that they're giving money to the radio station, but the letter comes from the university itself, which allows them that additional tax break. We did 10% of our donations in the final 2 weeks of the year last year.
Yeah.
We just went on the air with pre-recorded announcements and saying, if you're looking for a tax deduction, if you had a good year, share it with us. We'll help you out here. You're not just giving it to the radio station, you're also giving it to the University of Indianapolis.
Yep.
So that's something that we hit on a couple years ago. It's been very, very lucrative for us.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
and
I'm
yes,
sorry.
go
I was
ahead.
going to say we sort of do the same thing with our spring drive. We come up real close to April 15th, so we're always telling people, get your tax donation for next year in now. This is a great time. It always resonates well.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. End of year has become a really important funding period for public media in general. So good for you, Scott. That makes a lot of sense. We haven't even touched on social media, fundraising, friend raising, GoFundMe's, all of the ways that multiple generations, particularly younger generations, I think, interact with things that they care about. I am not an expert in any of those things, and I'm not in the demographic. So I'm going to assume you've got people smarter than I am to ask about how you might use those tools to increase your funding. Hello.
Okay. So I just wanted to know.
I was trying to say hello to your friend.
Yeah. To touch a little bit on that, Joyce, our students have asked for easier ways to give. Can I just kind of donate via GoFundMe or something like that? And the university doesn't. The foundation group that we work with doesn't allow us to do that. But ways we've been trying to work with them is to be able to give digitally, easier to give through social media, or to give by texting, X and donating that way, which they haven't had a lot of success, mostly due to the vendor that they use for their software to do all this stuff on the back end. But it is something they're aware of. They realize that on their end, to get donations from students who graduate, they have to make it easier as well. So I do think that's something important, or we get quite a few people that call and they just want to donate that way. They're listening on the app and they
That's
want
right.
to just go to our social media and donate that way. They don't want to call or have to
Yep.
drive to a website or something like that.
Yeah. Good for you. Good for you. And yeah, it does not surprise me. Again, I think, a focus group of, a handful of your staff could probably tell you how do they give money to other things. And those are, you got to meet them where they are.
Yeah.
So that's great. All right. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Chris. Shall we hit the post here?
Yeah.
I'm all about hitting the post.
Well, it is about that time. And just another reminder, I think the folks who are joining us live already know all these things. But for some of the folks who are watching after the fact, make sure askcbi.org is a regular stop for you. Also find us on social media so that you can find out about some of our future episodes in the CBI webinar series. Also, we have that workshop coming up online this summer. Really excited about that. It's all about sports broadcasting, plus our annual convention this year in Orlando, Florida, coming up in October. And I know I'm dating this a little bit, but I'm going to say it anyway. Awards, make sure that we're reminding people about our award submissions. Those are due around the middle of May.
Great. Well, it was wonderful to meet you all. It was great. Thank you so much for being here and for participating and sharing your stories about your stations. And I wish you guys tons of luck with the coming spring. And Chris and I will noodle about a fund for college radio stations at some point here, right, Chris?
Sure.